Okay, can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. My name is Eamon Anderson and I'm going to serve as our moderator for today's webinar, which is entitled Engaging Parents in Meeting the Needs of Their Children Through Trauma-Informed Visitation. This webinar is provided today by the National Native Children's Trauma Center at the University of Montana. The National Native Children's Trauma Center is a part of the Institute for Educational Research and Service, and we are a Category 2 trauma center within the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So you can find more information about our center at www.iers.umt.edu. So please know that this training will be recorded and archived for future access. If other people who aren't available to attend today would like to watch it at a later time. We would ask everyone to sign in to the webinar and provide us with your name, your organization, and also your email address in the chat box. We will reserve time at the end of the presentation for questions, and we would ask those of you who are signed into the webinar to type your questions into the chat box at any time. Our presenters for today are Patrick Shannon, a child welfare specialist here at the Trauma Center, Jerry Mayette, and also Jennifer Calder, who's a family engagement associate here at the Trauma Center. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Patrick.
Great. Thank you, Eamon. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move forward in this presentation here. And just so you know, today we're not able to plug into the LAN line for our network here at the university. So we are working off wireless. So just in case, I hope we are not going to get bumped off. But just so you know, that is a slight possibility for that to happen. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's the presentation outline today. We really want to begin with defining what a trauma-informed child welfare system is, and moving through that, and thinking about how these are implemented and started within communities, and really what it takes to implement these trauma-informed child welfare systems, and then how we engage families as workers and our role as a worker within visitation, and then including visitation best practices, including them being trauma informed, and then also what techniques and skills workers can do and build upon in regards to visitation. And then we'll even move further into scope and talk about visitation as a centerpiece for strengthening the parent-child relationship and that attachment. So this definition is the Chadwick Center's developed in 2011 from the Chadwick Trauma Informed Systems Project, and it's really embraced by many trauma organizations across the U.S. And I'll just say it out loud just because we have some people on phone as well that aren't able to see this this PowerPoint. But a trauma-informed child welfare system is one in which all parties involved recognize and respond to the varying impact of traumatic stress on children, caregivers, and those who have contact with the system. Programs and organizations within the system infuse this knowledge, awareness, and skills into their organizational cultures, policies, and practices. They act in collaboration, using the best available science to facilitate and support resiliency and recovery. So here at the National Native Children's Trauma Center, we even go further with that definition, and think about really what it takes for trauma-informed interventions and practices in child welfare to be implemented with tribal communities. And one thing that we feel is that the intervention and the practice needs to be acceptable by the tribal child welfare and mental health and behavioral health systems existing in the community, as well as it should be culturally fit and align with tribal customs, values, and practices. And we also have to acknowledge the needed supports in order to maintain and sustain those interventions and practices that child welfare workers would be carrying out. And then also just the overall appropriateness and fit of those interventions within the community, within the systems that are already existing, as well as if that intervention or practice is feasible for the agency that's carrying it out. And then last but not least, definitely increase the safety, permanency, and well-being of the child is really the outcome that we're looking for with the interventions and practices that we have been working with communities to provide in child welfare. So moving on with looking at the essential elements of a trauma-informed child welfare system. Some of you probably recognize these from previous trainings that we've done either in person or over webinar, but these are the seven essential elements of a trauma-informed child welfare system. These have been developed by the network that we are a part of, the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. And just to review these, maximize physical and psychological safety, and thinking about that also in visitation as well, identify trauma-related needs of the child and the family, and enhance child well-being and resilience, enhance family well-being and resilience, and then also enhancing the well-being and resilience of those that are working in these agencies, such as child welfare workers, mental health workers, law enforcement, and partner with the youth and families as well through the process in developing the case plan. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward in this presentation. And then also partner and collaborate with the other agencies that are in the community that already exist that really could contribute in integrating trauma-informed approaches. And just thinking about visitation and reviewing these 7 essential elements, it's really fairly easy to see that visitation really calls upon each of these elements. There's really none that are excluded when we're thinking about visitation. So now I'm going to hand it over to Jennifer Calder, and she'll be talking about engaging families and the child welfare workers' role.
Hello. We're going to talk a little bit about engaging families, what that means, and then our role as workers. And to start off, we're going to talk a little bit about change. A lot of what we're doing in our work is requiring and even mandating parents change, whether it's their parenting practices, some of the choices that they're making, etc. So there's a great body of research out there around change and what supports individuals through change. And we're going to first kind of take that other approach and say why people don't change. This was an activity that I did as part of a strengths-based coaching workshop put on by the St. Francis Institute, and we're going to do it together. So what we're going to do is I'm going to list maybe 10 different possibilities of why people won't change. I'll kind of read through them individually, and then we're going to do a poll, and we're going to have you vote and pick what you think are the top 4 reasons why people don't change. So first I'm going to read through them. So one possible reason, people are incapable of doing the task. People are not motivated. Individuals do not have enough time to do the task. People don't know how to do the task. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know why they should do it. They don't think the new way or whatever it is they're being asked to do will work. They face obstacles beyond their control. They have the wrong priorities.
Okay, can you hear me? If you can hear me, if you could type in the box, chat box down below, bottom right. Sorry about that. And I'll go ahead and hand it over back to Jennifer. Okay, everybody can hear. Yeah, and we'll go ahead and open the polls because I don't know if everybody saw the results. Let's see. So it's currently, it should be broadcasting right now, the results. And I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Jennifer. And I apologize for the technical difficulties.
Hi. Thanks for sticking with us. We appreciate it. So really briefly, we were looking at different reasons as to why people change, and thank you to the individuals who were able to participate in the voting, and thanks for everybody for just reflecting on it. So I'm just going to kind of return back. There were a number of possibilities, and the answers were, as far as why people change, the top 4 reasons. People don't know how to do the task. They don't know what they're supposed to do. They don't know why they should do what it is they're being asked. And whatever it is they're doing, they think it's right and they don't receive feedback otherwise. So these were kind of the top 4 reasons to get buy-in and engagement in the change process. And when we think about, I'll kind of share briefly some of the ones that I chose. I chose are not motivated when I did this activity. I also chose people don't know how to do the task. People think that their way is better or that they don't think it will work. And in the conversation that followed, it really kind of came out that some of the ones like are not motivated was a very sort of subtle bias that I had carried as to why individuals would not make changes in their practices. And so when we look at some of the other kind of options, there's a few others that kind of have that subtle bias. If we don't think people are capable, if we think they have the wrong priorities, etc. And if we think about it in our interactions, how that could potentially influence how we work with them. But really, in terms of buy-in and engagement, if people really understand what they're supposed to do, they're really clear, and they won't just keep doing whatever it is that they're doing. If they don't know why is it important to show up to a visitation? Well, if they want their child, this is part of the process. And so having those really clear conversations about why the visitation is such a key piece. And if we don't give them feedback, they may not link what it is that they're doing to kind of their improvement and success. So thank you for showing up to the visitation. This is going to be huge in reuniting with your child. So linking their efforts, big and small, to improvements along the way are instrumental in helping people through a change process. Patrick is going to talk for a little bit about within visitation, what some of this might look like.
Okay, so reviewing those 4 things that Jennifer just talked about, and the first one thinking about the parent not knowing how to do the task. And one example of this with visitation is thinking about that first initial visit, supervised visit possibly, that the parent is going to be having with the child after the removal, and thinking about how the parent is going to be responding to the child's ambivalence regarding the visit, and really possibly interpreting it and taking it very personal that the child does not want to have the visit with them when really that's not the case. It's the process that the child is going through at that point. And so really thinking about how we can help the parent understand the ambivalence that the child might have, especially more towards those first visits taking place. The next one, the parent not knowing what they are supposed to do. Well, one example that comes to mind for me specifically on this one for a few cases, are parents with newborns and being the first child, and newborns who do have medical or high needs, and the parent also having the preconditions of other issues prior to birth of the child, and really struggling to respond to the child's cues, and not really knowing what to do when the child is cueing the parent to meet their needs. And so the worker helping the parent through visitation, probably maybe a little more hands-on in regards to this type of example. And then third, don't know why they should do it. And the example for this one, helping the parent connect how their words and actions with the child, in front of the child, shapes the child's behavior, rather than the child's behavior being this other issue, really isolated issue, a characteristic of the child. But really it's the influence of the parent, and the parent's words and actions and behaviors that shape the child's behavior and thinking. And then fourth, the parents think they're doing it right, but receive no feedback. Discipline for this one. If a child has chronic trauma, and specifically in the home, a lot of family violence in the home, yelling, and was recently removed, and the parent attempts to discipline the child for something that the child did wrong in the visit, and through disciplining, they get in front of the child's face, and of course, with considering the child's trauma history and overall parenting, this wouldn't be appropriate, and it would be definitely an opportunity for whoever is supervising the visit or doing the visit coaching, to help the parent think of different ways and more appropriate ways to discipline the child for behaviors, and definitely using that coaching piece at that point. So I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Jennifer.
Thanks. One of the things that often sometimes comes up is we share information with some of the clients and the people that we're working with, and yet it doesn't always seem to get across. There's a great quote by Sidney Harris: "The two words information and communication are often used interchangeably, but they signify really different things. Information is giving out, and communication is getting through." And so very often we may be giving out or giving the information about what a visitation is, what time, what they need to bring, etc. And it may not be getting through. And I want to just take a couple minutes to talk about the role that trauma might play in kind of interfering with our ability to get through in communicating with our clients. So all of the research shows that there's an impact that trauma can have on brain structure and function. So whether our clients have a history of trauma in their childhood, or whether they're kind of experiencing domestic violence in the home themselves, or ongoing stresses of poverty, about worrying about food insecurity, worrying about their housing, etc., that this impacts our ability to think clearly. We may be, our clients may be more hardwired to sort of fight, flight, or freeze, and those are more deeply ingrained and have stronger neural pathways. And so their ability to sort of stop and process information may be impacted. So it may be less likely that they're able to remember, and maybe remember when they were supposed to show up for an appointment, or what it was, or why it was important. And really problem solving may be impacted by trauma, as well as planning. So being also mindful that some of our clients may be specifically traumatized by the current experience of child removal, that even though there were circumstances and there were very good reasons why the child was removed, that in and of itself can be very traumatic and very difficult for that individual parent and the family. And so when they're coming into meeting with us, they may be traumatized, and that in and of itself, they may be in a heightened sense of sort of that fight or flight, or the flight or freeze response. So sometimes we see disengagement and clients not showing up. And sometimes we interpret that as not caring and not really wanting, or that it's not important to them. But within a trauma lens, it's also important to think about that there's a possibility that they're kind of just shutting down, that the experience is so overwhelming, that they feel so powerless and unable to influence change and act, that they have really just kind of frozen and kind of shut down a little bit. So another impact of trauma within our clients and our role is that it disrupts relationships. They may not have experiences sort of building healthy relationships with other adults. They don't have experience of how to build necessarily a healthy relationship with their child, and they need help with that. So what and we know that optimal learning and growth really happens in safe, trusting relationships. And this is really the hopeful part. And this is what's really helpful to think about in our role as a caseworker, is that there's a tremendous opportunity to build and be that safe, trusting person in the life of a parent. You know, it doesn't mean everything they do is okay, because we still have kind of standards and expectations, but you can still be that safe, trusting person. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that might be. So some of this kind of is reconceptualizing the role of the caseworker and maybe thinking about the caseworker as a coach. You think about your personal experiences of a coach who was really influential, and you think about, you know, qualities they had. They were maybe really fair. They were maybe really knowledgeable. They maybe had really clear high expectations. They may have been kind of strict, but they held you to kind of an accountability. They held you to a standard and an expectation. But they generally, good coaches are also supportive. So there's that fine line of sort of being fair, being strict, having some accountability, but also support and caring. You think about how they made you feel. Good coaches often make you feel like you're very capable and that you're able to do what it is that's being asked. And that really is one of the greatest gifts that a coach can play, a role that a coach can play. And the idea really is, can we bring that spirit of coaching into our work with our clients? Patrick shared this with me, this do for, do with, and cheer on. And so when we think about and working with our clients, very often in the beginning, we're going to have to do a lot more for them. They're going to be more reliant on us. As we build their capabilities and capacity through coaching, telling them what information they need, sharing, maybe even modeling specific strategies, we're going to be able to do with them, kind of continually reinforcing the things that we see that are working. And then eventually we're going to have that sort of gradual release of responsibility to the parent, and where we can just really take that role of just cheering them on as they seek in their permanency planning for their child. And just really briefly, I want to just review 5 big ideas of strength-based coaching, and you can see the reference at the bottom. So the first one is developing positive relationships, and this is really mirrored in all of the kind of emerging research in child welfare, that the role of, if you can build that positive relationship with the client. And a thing to consider about that is that everybody, the clients we work with, every adult in our life, every child, we all really need to be seen, to be heard, to be respected, to be safe, to belong, to connect, and to contribute. These are fundamental human needs. And if we can bring those out and help our clients feel seen and heard and respected, primarily help them feel safe, physically, emotionally, that they're much more likely to be successful in their planning. I think of motivational interviewing and how you really tease out what it is, understanding where they are instead of moving them kind of quickly through a change process, but that idea of being seen and heard. Another idea is exchanging rightness for curiosity. So whether or not our clients may have made choices that are not good. One of the things in our role is not to necessarily excuse, but to understand. Because the understanding piece is really going to help move into the change. So their choices may not have been okay, but why did they make the choices that they did? And that understanding will help move them forward. Developing partnerships that share power. So really that partnership piece, giving them some decisions, some choices, even if it's little things like where they want to sit in the room, if we can give them options about times to meet, what works for them, down to what their goals are in the next 3 months, etc., in terms of whether it's reunification or so forth. So whatever decision making that we can allow for them within the limits, the priority is that the child is safe, and so whatever we can support them in. Building on strengths is huge. We all know how important it is when people see strengths in us as individuals, that's so helpful. And if we can really be sort of strengths detectives and really, which may be hard at times, because some of our clients may be really struggling, but can we see the strengths and mirror those back? It's much more likely that they'll engage in change and be successful. And then again, providing constant kind of feedback, genuine, but much more positive than negative. And just really briefly, this idea, very often we talk about involvement. We want families or parents involved. And a nice way to think about involvement versus engagement. Involvement very often are kind of when things are being done to you. You are involved. When you are engaged, really you're a part of it and things are being done with you. And it's that kind of shift in kind of approach that we want to think about, doing with versus doing to, because many of our clients may have experienced a lot have powerlessness, and a lot of things have been done to them. And then just really briefly and kind of in summation, successfully engaging clients, the research in involuntary clients, the research really sort of supports and kind of sums up being clear and specific about expectations, providing choices when possible, asking for overt client commitment, so being very clear and explicit and getting that level of commitment, and then involving them in goals and tasks. So thank you, and I'm going to turn it back over to Patrick.
Okay, so I hope we didn't lose too many people with the technical difficulties. One thing that will go ahead and let you know that is that it's being recorded, and it's continuing to be recorded, and it'll be available again online on the webinar archive site. So, and we'll go ahead and give a link at the end of this presentation as well. So we're going to go ahead and move into really why it's important to have and to reflect on our own parent-child visitation and really some ideas in regards to best practices for visitation to take place. So a few studies actually show that regular supervised family time, and again, it depends on who you're speaking to, but it's family time and visitation is used interchangeably depending on the organization that you're working with, and it really varies, but really means the same thing. But really, when regular supervised family time has it really has multiple outcomes that are positive. And these are four examples right here. And the first one is regular supervised visits really increase the likeliness for reunification to occur. And the second one, when reunification does occur, it's more likely to be successful if these are happening regularly. And then also, it decreases the amount of length of time in foster care as well, the studies have found. And then the fourth increases child's overall well-being, specifically looking at fewer behavioral problems, as well as anxiety and depression decreasing for the child. So even looking closer into trauma-informed visitation practices, of course, this says facilitate visit with birth family and siblings within 72 hours of placement. I know there's a lot going on that workers have to try to really in a race with time with in regards to trying to get reports done and getting services organized and placement. But best practice is saying it's trying to get really visitation as scheduled as soon as possible. And then having the person who is supervising the visits really understand the issues surrounding physical and psychological safety for the child. And then we also want the environment to be as comfortable as possible for the child. Thinking about the first visits to occur, probably not the best idea to have um, the visits take place out in the community in a public area that has much more people around at that point, but um, maybe more where the child and the parent can focus on that relationship, and then maybe move forward in visits into the community, and then also help both the parent and those as well as the foster parent pre and post visits, help them understand about trauma triggers, and what the child really could have a trigger to, and also known as the revving state as well, before the child gets up to the next step, which is re-experience, where the child really feels that they're re-experiencing that traumatic event. So the examples might include noisy environment, verbal threats of consequences by the parent, the person whom the child is currently in conflict with as well, could also be a trigger. And then also really seeing visitation being an opportunity, and really what Jennifer has spoke a lot about is helping the parent practice skills in regards to meeting the children's needs and setting appropriate limits within visitation and practicing that, and boundaries, and helping the child manage their trauma triggers and reactions. And then possibly even in visitations where the child is very ambivalent about the visit to take place, is working with the child in identifying a sign of some sort to acknowledge that they are not feeling good about the visit, or feeling unsafe, or really when the child is feeling unsafe, and so that communication can happen and the visit can end. And then of course always have the team approach in mind when trying to figure out visitation, especially in the really challenging cases as well, and really pulling support from the treatment team, the child's therapist if they're there, as well as your supervisor, and bouncing ideas off them, as well as requesting information from them, or recommendations in regards to visits. So moving forward with really the logistics of visitation, if it's possible, I know, like I said, many things going on. If you had to, if it came down to having to remove the child, but if you could meet with the parent prior to the initial visit, even and really thinking that having those concerns discussed already already happened, but meeting with the parent and picking up where it left off in regards to the reasons for really you had to remove, and discuss those safety concerns, and from there develop an interaction plan or a visit plan with the parent, with the team's input as well. And really the interaction plan, parent-child interaction plan, would be ideally a part of the case plan itself, and really being pivotal in helping the parent move forward in building skills within visitation as well, and measuring progress. So within that interaction plan, it would be important to have clear expectations, and really defining the frequency of visitations, when, where, duration. I mean, this interaction plan could even be like a really simple chart layout where it talks about face-to-face contact, phone contact, correspondence, even letters, and defining for each of those what the frequency will be, if it will be supervised, really making it clear what the expectations are, and hopefully will save you a lot of difficulty moving forward within the case plan in regards to miscommunication and misunderstandings as far as what visits should be happening and how they should be happening. And then also making goals and developing goals that are very specific and very responsive to the the concerns and reasons for removal. Oh, and I'll go ahead. I was just reminded that I should probably close the poll and put up the chat box so people can. I'll be able to know if I get kicked off. Okay, there we go. And then also, so like I was saying, going and within that discussion with the parent is developing those goals and in what they could achieve in visitation, and that are really tailored to the child's needs, um, and including having input from the treatment team as well, including the child's therapist. And for example, these goals could be positive interactions, that increase to positive interactions, the parent responding to the safety and really supervising the child, um, appropriate discipline as well, even nutrition, thinking about how the parent can meet the child's needs in visits as well, where food might actually be an issue or of concern within reasons for safety. And then also developmental appropriate expectations from the parent um, and for the child at the developmental level. And then moving as well even further on to clear expectations, again, saying, even writing it down in this interaction plan. If I need to cancel, I agreed to contact my social worker at this number at least 24 hours in advance. Just making that clear as possible from the get-go. And then also the parent would read and agree to understanding that they need to be on time, and if there's any other expectations, what they need to bring. If it's a newborn or an infant, it might need the additional items. Um, and then if possible or appropriate, it would be best to involve a child in this plan. So now we'll move forward on how the supervisor really can be trauma informed and use strategies that are trauma informed in regards to visitation specifically. And within staffing with individual workers regarding cases, discuss how the worker might see the trauma reactions within visitation taking place and how that connects to what the child has experienced. And this would also be an assistance with the child's therapist if they're involved in the case as well. Um, and also trying to find or gather and distribute resources for both birth parents and resource parents. We do at our National Native Children's Trauma Center, we do a training for foster parents in regards to for caring for children who have experienced trauma. And there is some component to it in regards to visitation. And so, of course, that comes up a lot. We know that resource parents are not in this and trying to and taking care of these children for the money. They're doing it because they really do care about these children that are in their care, either it being foster parents or kinship parents, licensed kinship, whatever it being. They really do care about the children that they're caring for, and of course, frequently concerns arise from the foster parents, specifically surrounding visitation, and having a curriculum like this where resource parents can receive the knowledge and information regarding trauma, hopefully can frame what they're seeing from the child as far as behaviors go, and not really seeing it seeing it as a need to discontinue visits necessarily. And so that curriculum that we use here at the Trauma Center for resource parents, we've done it a couple times, and we received very positive feedback from the foster parents regarding the information, and even just allowing that discussion between seasoned foster parents as well as new ones take place in regards to helping children mitigate trauma responses and developing coping skills has definitely been positive and received positively by foster parents. So now I'm going ahead and turn it over to Jerry, and we'll go from there.
All right, thank you, Patrick. So this portion of the presentation really does dovetail quite a bit into what Patrick and Jennifer have covered. And so some of this is going to sound very similar, but we can't really stress enough how the importance of regular and consistent visitation is for the parent and child relationship. And so hopefully this will be something that you can take to the parents as sort of a psychoeducational method and communicating with them the importance of, again, frequent, consistent, and predictable visitation. So the three pieces that we'll cover are the importance of visitation, reasons for inconsistent visitation, and then ways to increase the likelihood of consistent visitation. So starting with the importance of visitation and how it is maintaining that parent-child attachment. So when a child is in the child welfare system, they're already experiencing trauma, possibly through abuse, neglect, maybe violence in the home that they're witnessing. So those are things that are already happening to children. But the removal process itself is also very traumatizing for children. And it really sets up this sort of grief and loss with the separation. So a big part of visitation can help with that process, but also help with sort of preserving that family unit, especially for reunification as a goal. The visitation can act as a buffer and promote that sort of safe interaction between parents and children. And there's also research that shows that children that have attachment security are less fearful in new situations and have more resilience and have better cognitive performance. And then that having that visitation and that attachment security is really positively influenced by this frequent, predictable, and consistent visitation. And then, of course, the more the visitation increases, the likelihood the child will return home much quicker on that. The other thing about sort of building these attachment relationships is that it really helps the child form new relationships and have fewer problems within developing those relationships. That attachment security helps them with their interpersonal skills, and so that they can build on those as they develop relationship. The next piece of the importance of visitation is to decrease that sense of abandonment that happens when removal of the child and that separation. And especially for adolescents, this is really important if they lack that secure attachment. They need to really feel like they're tied to the family unit to help them sort of combat those feelings of separation and abandonment that they have experienced. And even if the relationship between the parent and the child isn't completely positive, having this visitation continue with adolescents will really help have that sort of preservation of family feelings. So adolescents have that sense of belonging, and they're not feeling left out. Another piece that's very important to address is this feeling of ambiguous loss. It often results in what's called boundary ambiguity. And what that is that often children don't know who's in the family and who's out of the family, especially when there's separation. And that higher quantity of this boundary ambiguity is going to lead to dysfunction. And so it's very important, again, to have this consistency in visitation so that this ambiguity doesn't lead to feelings of hopelessness and despair. So the next piece that we'll look at is just child well-being. And I know we've kind of touched on some of this, and it just, I think, goes without saying that the separation of children from their parents really is a risk factor associated with poor mental health. And what happens is children are trying to figure things out for themselves. And so they have this sort of internalizing and externalizing behaviors that start to happen. And internalizing behaviors look like depression, sort of development of mood and anxiety disorders, even substance use. And the externalizing behaviors are more those observable behaviors, juvenile delinquency, even juvenile justice systems start to come into play. In one study where children were not visited at all by their biological parents, they had the highest externalizing scores, and it fell in a very significant range. So again, the frequency, the consistency, and predictability of visitation can really help with these externalizing and internalizing behaviors. It's been shown that this frequent contact with parents is sort of less anxious and depression that happens with children. And the other thing is that, parents that are involved in the visitation process, they start to have more positive feelings about the placement, and then their relationship with the children and the visitation process, and it all starts to affect the child's well-being, but it also affects the parents' well-being. So now that we've talked about kind of what the importance is in terms of visitation, in terms of this sense of abandonment that children are having and how to mitigate that, and attachment, and also well-being, let's think about maybe reasons why visitation is inconsistent and why visitation might be challenging for parents. So quite a bit of this information that I'm going to present came from a research study that was conducted to really look at trauma and visitation and what that looks like from the parent's angle. There was different groups that sort of identified different feelings, and one of the groups talked a lot about that feeling of powerlessness that's already been kind of talked about, and almost a fear of the system and maybe not knowing how to navigate that. And again, kind of dovetails a lot back to what Jennifer had talked about. Another group really talked about this removal process as manifesting in rage and hostility towards child welfare, which makes it very difficult to engage those parents. So a third group really talked more about how the grief and guilt of this removal process. And one woman actually talked about how her guilt, she knew she made the mistake, but she felt guilty because she was still in the home, but her child wasn't, and she had made that mistake. And so what's happening with these groups is this grief and this trauma of having their children removed. It's making it have an impact on the way that they can engage in services, such as visitation. And they identified that they knew that visitation was going to strengthen the relationship with their children, but they were feeling so emotionally distanced and hopeless that they really couldn't even find the energy to to show up for visitation. And so these are things that are really impactful with parents that are suffering that trauma. Another piece that I found really interesting with this study is that the participants really talked a lot about how they didn't even have nurturing adults to help them with the process. And so with the absence of that nurturing support system, along with struggling with this guilt and depression, it was becoming very overwhelming for these parents to consider visitation. Some of the additional factors that this study sort of brought to mind that I found interesting was how they talked about it in sort of the history and context of what was happening. So history and context to them meant the things that are happening outside of the visit are having that direct impact on the visit. Things like maybe struggling to keep their job, or mental health issues, or substance abuse, or domestic violence, things like that that are happening in their lives that are making visitation a little bit more difficult for them because of how they're feeling and struggling themselves. And again, it was odd how they thought of this history and context as sort of negatively impacting their ability to maintain and strengthen relationship through visitation. So really understanding these barriers that are happening with parents, even financial challenges, lack of funds for food or toys or entertainment to help with the visitation process, really does make a difference for parents in being able to engage in that frequent, consistent, and predictable visitation. So now that we've kind of gone through and talked about the importance of visitation and what's maybe happening with parents and that they can't necessarily make visitation consistently, I'd like to talk about, as child welfare workers, how to sort of increase that likelihood that visitation can happen with parents and children. So one of the things is sort of that I kind of like refer to as like sort of setting the stage, and Patrick kind of talked about this, and so sort of want to just reiterate some of this. So kind of what does that visit look like? So think about maybe if you were the parent in the child welfare system, and how what would you want that visit to look like? Do you want it to be a home-like setting? Do you want it to address culturally your needs? And that's sort of that safety and privacy balance there, so you can have some time with your children. The study that I had talked about just recently in the previous module, it was interesting how they talked about an hour-long visit wasn't enough time to have that sort of reunion with their children, and then be able to have some meaningful time together before they had that grief of separation. And so those are things to really think about, is how long those visits are, and again, having some say with the parents in what that visit will look like. So again, sort of as a child welfare worker, how can I kind of work with parents, and how can I kind of make a difference for them? And a lot of this, again, goes back to that engagement process and making sort of them feel like they have an interpersonal relationship with you as a child welfare worker, and sort of continuing with that frequent contact and case investment, really knowing that my caseworker is invested in who I am and what's happening. Things like transportation, making sure that those are not getting in the way of parents being able to make it to visitation, and also being able to offer other support services such as parenting classes, mental health or substance abuse treatment, and being able to help sort of link parents with those sort of resources that they need. And then also, again, reiterating sort of that support before and after, during that process visitation and really understanding how it's very traumatizing to kind of go back through these emotions associated with visitation in terms of reunion and separation and being there and being present. And again, as Patrick had talked about, sort of having those guidelines, what's expected, what are the ramifications if it's not, um, so that there is that likelihood of that consistent, frequent, and predictable visitation. And engaging with children and bringing children into play with this. This experience of trauma with children is really associated with chaos and loss of control and an unpredictable environment. And children really need predictability to learn about and organize their worlds. And so, sort of creating rituals with children and having them be an active part of that ritual. It was suggested that maybe having a transitional object, something that they bring to the visit or something that the parent brings. And so there's this sort of representation of what the visit is going to be in this ritual process. And then also being able to plan for variations and unexpected changes with children. But the biggest piece that makes a difference for children is just hanging in there and being with them, sticking around, meaning what you say and saying what you mean. Children who are often moving around from placement to placement, what they do is they start to have some behaviors that look like pushing you away and rejecting you because they're trying to protect themselves from further loss. And so if you can stick with the children that are appearing oppositional or unlikable or inconsistent in their behaviors, then that really makes a difference for them. And the final thing I want to say is don't underestimate the impact that you have by just hanging in there. So just to kind of reiterate how visitation has an effect on attachment, well-being, how it helps reduce those symptoms of feeling abandoned, how understanding parent trauma and removing barriers will really help to lead toward that consistent visitation, having that clear and frequent communication, and then also just that ritual and sort of removing some of that chaos and hanging in there with children really will help with that frequent, consistent, and predictable visitation. So now we'll turn it over to Patrick and do.
Okay, so thanks for staying on with us, everyone. And typically, we reserve about 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation or the webinar to either type in questions or ideas to discuss within the chat box down below on the right-hand corner. And as well, for those that are on the phone currently right now with Eamon, if you could relay your questions or ideas to be shared with her via phone, and she'll go ahead and type them into the chat box that we have here, and we'll try to respond to them as best as we can. And of course, if not, we'll definitely follow up. You guys can come over here and join. I won't know the answer to all these questions. Yep. I thought Lorraine might have been typing a question. maybe not. And of course, if you don't feel comfortable typing a question right now, um, you can definitely email us. We'll have our contact information at the end of that on the last page here. Um, so, should Lorraine's question was, should visits be only scheduled when clients are compliant? I think that's I think a really tough question that probably would be on a case by case basis, considering cases where substance abuse is involved with the parent, and also with the child's needs. Always, I think um, where the parent or the child is really struggling with the parent relationship, and considering what history has happened for that child within the relationship. A visit, I mean, I think there could be some times where visitation really, really needs to be reviewed if it's really thinking about the potential of it being beneficial, um, or detriment for that child at that point. I really think it's something that needs to be staffed with the the child and parents team as a whole, um, definitely. But at the same time, just considering um, what research shows with consistent visitation, and as much as possible, of course, we'd like to see visitation happen, but I do think there is some times where it really needs to be reviewed closely by the team. So thank you, Lorraine, for the question. Looks like other people are typing in questions, and as well as comments too, or input. Of course, we definitely enjoy that. Our idea, whilst people are typing in questions, um, as we move forward in this webinar series, if you have the capabilities to also share audio on yours, and even possibly video on your end, for participants, that would be great. And we can open that up for future webinars as well, just figuring out technology beforehand. So would definitely be great. We have another question by Sheldon Nichols. Hopefully, I'm pronouncing your name right. Sometimes we get parents who progress very slowly, and the visits end up going on for, scrolling down, oops, on for many months, which can burden our therapists due to heavy caseloads. What should we do if the parent does not seem to progress, but the Indian child welfare worker wants visits to continue? I again think that one as well is on a definitely a case by case basis, considering where the parent is at and meeting the child's needs. I'm always thinking about, as a worker, I was always thinking about assessing where the child is at in their needs, and how much attention that the parent needs to provide and support in helping the child, and caring for the child, and where the parent is actually at in the skills. And I mean, and sometimes it can be skewed for a really long amount of time. And I really think, for instance, I don't know if you're thinking about a specific case, Sheldon, but um, I know parenting evaluations, if it's a specific case that's really dragging on for a long time, might be appropriate or definitely beneficial if you would be able to set it up, because that might be a crucial point for that to take place. I'm sorry, it takes me a while to think about other areas for this, for questions, and um, just thinking about, I think definitely there's times for the team to review where the parent is at in progressing through their treatment plan and case plan. in regards to meeting their child's needs. And for instance, we did a webinar, I believe it was the first webinar of the pilot series that's on the archived webinar webpage. Sorry, that's hard for me to pronounce. And it'll be it's on there currently right now. We'll give the link at the end of this presentation. But the family group decision making model also, we recommend that professionals are also involved within that process as well. And really, visitation is dragging on for a very long time, and progress is not really indicating to move forward or parent skills. It probably would either something's not working, really is what that's indicating, and it would be great to at that point to have that family group decision making at that point as well, and have everybody come to the table and discuss where the case is at. So we have another question, Basil from Fort Belknap Social Services. How do workers motivate parents to stay in compliance with treatment plans? Well, let's see. Do you want to speak on that one, or? Let's see.
I'm not sure if I had like definitive ways, but I think sort of letting the parents know that you're sorry, just helping the parents know that you're invested in the success might help to help them. I think that you know, again, I know that we've kind of said this, but it's sort of that case by case, and what is the context that's happening around the motivation, and what are the things that are maybe they're struggling with. I think, you know, do you have something, Jennifer, that you want to add?
One thing to add in a consideration in terms of what motivates individuals, very often when individuals disengage with the process, it's a sense of overwhelm or that things will not change. That's one main reason. If we can help them break down the process into kind of discrete pieces and show them the changes along the way, and help them really see the progress that they made, and help them say, you know, we'll take one more step and that will get us closer, and to kind of have clear benchmarks of progress for them along the way, that can be really valuable to continue to keep them engaged and sort of motivated. It's kind of sometimes when we feel like nothing is changing, when we only look at the primary, the kind of big outcome, the end goal of what we want, and if we're not there yet. But if we can help see kind of benchmarks along the way, that can sometimes really be beneficial.
Thanks, Jennifer. Other questions or ideas? Looks like we have about 4 minutes here. And we'll go ahead and move the slides forward. If people have other questions or comments or ideas, definitely you can enter them into the chat while we move forward here. The next webinar here on April 2nd, about a month from now, is on time management and documentation for child welfare staff. And the presenters will be Megan Rides at the door, and I, and possibly an additional presenter on that day as well. The link is down below, and you'll probably receive another invite or reminder to participate in that. And then that's the link, the very bottom link, the nnctcwebinars.weebly.com is where we are storing our archived webinars, and we'll go ahead and post the schedule for the seven webinars in the series on there as well, so people have an idea, as well as the links for each of those. And hopefully we won't have as much technical difficulties on those as much as we did this time. So Aaron, is there anyone else that wants to the PowerPoint? We can add them to the email list. So if you would like to receive the PowerPoint for this this presentation, please go ahead and post your email there in the bottom right chat box for Erin Harris Church, and she'll go ahead and forward you the presentation here today. And again, we apologize definitely for the technical difficulties. It's really probably the first time. It didn't even happen in the pilot series that we got booted off. So definitely apologize for that, and try to take precautions so it doesn't happen again next time. I just want to say thank you so much for participating here today with us. We hope to see you join on the next 6 sessions. And here is our contact information if you want to get in contact with us as well, and as well as the overall site for the National Native Children's Trauma Center. We hope you found this this webinar definitely beneficial, and hopefully we see you again soon. Thanks so much.